This is Teresa Davis, your host of the Grief Mentor podcast. Welcome to Season 2, where together we will journey through the hardships that grief thrust upon us while holding on to the anchor that is trustworthy and true. Here you will find interviews and biblical truths that speak healing into the mind, body, and spirit of the brokenhearted. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the show, guys. This is your host, Teresa Davis. If this is the first time that you are joining me, this is a monthly Q&A episode where I will answer any grief-related question that I get that comes to me from a direct message, through an email, or from just someone approaching me. So today's question came from my DMs, and it was from a daughter-in-law whose mother-in-law was suffering from the death of her husband. And they had been married, guys, for 61 years. And her mother-in-law is now 80 years old, living life without the one she built her life with. She asked me, so how do I compassionately speak to my mother-in-law about my late father-in-law? She mentions her husband nearly every time we communicate. I know the old saying that you can't see what's in front of you if you are constantly looking out of the rearview mirror. But what if the past is so beautiful that it's too painful to let go? As much as I'd love to steer her thoughts onto the present and the future, I cannot and I will not ignore the past. She may see this as a corridor she's walking down alone, with no lights at the end of the tunnel, except to see her husband one day again in heaven. Wow. How beautifully expressed this tension that those who grieve live in, of what was and what is. I was brought to tears when I read her question. First, because I was moved by the compassion she had for her mother-in-law. Second, I was surprised, really, of her ability to be able to understand her mother-in-law's grief. Not everyone has that kind of insight. And number three, I was blessed by her determination to not steer her away from the beauty of the past. What a gift she is to her mother-in-law. Why is it, though, guys? Why does our culture say that when someone dies, that we're supposed to act like the past never happened, right? We're supposed to put everything in a box with a tight lid on it, and we're not supposed to bring it up. We're not supposed to talk about it. Because then we hear things like, well, she's dwelling in the past, or she's really stuck. They can't move forward. Or you might hear, I feel really bad for her or for him, but really, come on. It's time to deal with it and move on. Sound familiar to you guys? Really? Is that the way we're supposed to honor the ones that we love, by forgetting that they ever walked this earth beside us? No, that is absurd. So who came up with these rules? It was interesting because I found on cancer.net that American society is considered a death to dying culture. Let me say that again. American society is considered a death-denying culture. In general, Americans don't want to talk about death. They don't want to think about death. They definitely don't want you to talk about death, because they don't want to acknowledge that death is an inevitable reality. I once heard Arnold Schwarzenegger say that there is nothing after death. After death, you're in the ground, and that's it. It's over. He further commented, when people say, I will see them again in heaven, it sounds good, but the reality is that we won't see each other after we're gone. That's the sad part. And I know people feel comfortable with death, but I don't. The reason I believe Arnold's words reflects the hearts of many Americans is because Americans are afraid to die. The fear of the unknown, and I'm using air quotes for those that are listening, the fear of the unknown, and quote, the self-made people, they rely on their own strength to carry them through life. And the fear of what happens after they see themselves losing control is too much for them to bear. So therein, I believe, lies the root of why Americans have fear with death and dying. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want you to talk about it. Because what they perceive to be fear of the unknown is too much for them. They see their lives through the lens of what is all about me. If they can deceive themselves and deny that death is inevitable for everyone, then they are able to continue to live in their fantasy world. That's what makes us different, guys. For those of us who grieve, because reality has hit us square in the face, and we know what it's like every day to live in that tension. Grief strips us down and removes all the pretenses. There is no fantasy in death. And we know that because we live it. We no longer live through the lens of fairy tales, but the harsh reality that death comes to everyone at some time or another. So you better quit playing. You better quit playing at life and making the unimportant things important, and decide to live your life in a way that matters, not only for this earth, but for the one yet to come. Because I'm not going to wake up in heaven and be surprised, because I've placed my treasure in things that's not made with human hands. Listen, if we all live our lives in this fantasy world, then we're going to be like the 5 foolish virgins. Are you familiar with that story in the book of Matthew? There was 10 virgins, remember? And 5 of those were considered wise. 5 of them were considered foolish. The ones that were considered wise, they kept their lamps ready, right? With oil. For when the bridegroom came, they'd be ready. But the 5 foolish virgins, they did not keep their lamps ready with oil. So when the announcement came that at midnight the bridegroom was on his way, the 5 virgins who were unprepared went to the prepared virgins and said, "Let us have some of your oil." And they said, "Oh no, we can't do that, because then we won't have enough. So you need to go and buy some for yourselves." So while they were gone, the bridegroom came, and the ones that were prepared were invited in to the banquet with the bridegroom, and then the door was shut. And when those came, they'd had to go purchase their oil, and they knocked on the door. The answer came that said, "Truly, I tell you, I don't know you." Living in a fantasy world that denies death is just like those 5 unprepared virgins. But those of us that grieve, we understand reality. Forgetting your past sets you up for your failure in your future. Do you believe that? Forgetting your past sets you up for failure in your future. Remember when Jesus healed the 10 lepers? Out of his compassion, he healed 10 lepers. After they received their healing, only 1 came back to thank him. And while he was still down on his knees, Jesus said, "Where are the other 9?" Now, I believe this was a rhetorical question, not directed toward the one who was on his knees thanking God for the healing, but it was meant to bring up a point to the one that was on his knees, thanking Jesus for being healed, because he's the one that did the right thing. And Jesus said to you, "Stand up, because your faith, your trust in me, your confidence in God's power has restored you." Now, I don't know what happened to the other 9, because we're not told, but I believe that that man got up and walked away different than the other 9. Forgetting your past sets you up for failure in your future. So to answer her question, how do I compassionately speak to my mother-in-law? This is what you tell her. Number 1, the past is sacred and should never be abandoned. Number 2, the past is where the beautiful memories live, and allowing her to honor her memories allows her to bring her husband into her present and into her future. Reassure her that no one is ever going to forget. You know, this is important, especially for someone who's been married 61 years. Reassuring her that no one is going to forget, and allowing her to express her memories is a gift. It's a gift that you're giving her by allowing her to do that. Remember that living in the present and early grief, and guys, I define early grief as at least the first 2 years, and that's dependent upon how your loved one died. Okay, there's many factors that affect that. But I believe that those first 2 years, living in the present is very, very challenging, because it's a constant reminder that the one you love is no longer physically right there with you. So it's important to remember that when she is pouring her heart out with her memories. It's very important to remember that living in the present is very, very difficult for her. Remember that the future is not a reality for her yet. And this takes time. It takes intentional time to move from a place of why to a place of being able to honor. So it's important to keep that in mind. The future is really not a reality to her yet. So how do you help her honor her memories? How do you help her get to a place to where she can feel with comfort that his life made a difference, that she can feel with comfort that her memories are important to not only her, but to others as well? No, the number one way I think is great is a digital photo frame. It allows hundreds, it depends on, what size you get, but it allows hundreds of videos to just be seen over and over and over again. And I recommend that you put it in a place where she can easily see it, maybe in a place that's been created just to honor his memory. Number two, make a picture collage of their life together. Either do it yourself or have someone else do it. When my husband turned 60 years old, this was before the death of our son, I made picture collages, and I have probably maybe 3 or 4 hung downstairs in a place that we are at frequently, and it's pictures of all through the years. It's like 4 big poster boards. Do you know how many times I have found myself down there just running my hand over those, feeling the memories? It's evidence that the one that we love lived. And so it's important, guys, for all of us to be able to feel those memories and look at those pictures. In the beginning, it's very hard for those pictures sometimes to bring comfort. But even, I'm 4 years in, running my hands over those memories is evidence that Andrew walked this earth, and it is important for us to be able to focus on that. So making a picture collage of their life together would be probably very comforting for her. And even if you aren't artistic yourself, and it's not really hard to do, guys, because I'm not particularly artistic, but I did it, with the decoupage things, and it looks great. It's not fancy, but it doesn't need to be fancy. What's up there is the pictures, and that's what's most important. Number 3, reassure her that he will never be forgotten, nor his memory. Now, a way that you can do this is when you're spending time together as a family, spend some time sharing memories and the impact that he made in everybody's individual life. Okay, so this will not only bring her comfort, yeah, he was important to me, but he's important to you too. And this will allow her to feel the comfort of knowing, you know what, he's not going to be forgotten because he made a difference in their life, and they're never going to forget that. Number 4, this is a big one, especially for the elderly community. And I'll tell you why here in a moment, but help her become involved in community outside of family. Okay. There's a couple of reasons for that, because number one, as a family, when you're absorbing all of the grief of someone, especially someone at her age, someone who's alone and probably not having somebody to converse with all day long. So she keeps all this bottled up until she's with someone, and then that's all she feels like she wants to talk about. So as a family, sometimes it's really important to be able to diversify that a little bit, and allowing her to be involved in a community where she can connect with other widows would be huge, because then the combination of that community and family will help bring her to a place to where she can feel it'll be helpful for her in processing her grief. So a good way to do that, guys, is grief share. Now, I will say Tony and I attended a grief share. If you've heard some of my previous podcasts, we went through that twice, because the first time you're in a little bit of shock and it was hard to absorb. And the second time, I felt like the content had more meaning for me, and I was able to hang on to it longer because I was able to actually process it, if that makes sense. But the largest community in our grief share group, both times, were widows. So it's a great place for widows to be able to connect. And this will give her a sense of belonging, because even though the family are rallying around her, loving on her, they do not understand what she's going through 100%. So allowing her to be with other widows that get it gives her a community. So that's a great opportunity for her. And here's the thing, she's 80. So maybe if you have a loved one like this, they might not be able to drive, or maybe they're still driving. But here's the thing, guys, it's really intimidating for somebody who's been married 61 years to take some steps out there into the unknown by themselves when they've had the love of their life with them for 61 years. So if someone could go with her, at least for the first 2 or 3 meetings, because in fact, when Tony and I attended, I was kind of on the fence. Am I ready for this? I was scared. And I had my husband beside me. But what they told me when I went in was, you know what? Kick the tires for three sessions. After 3 sessions, if you feel like this is not for you and it's not helping you, then maybe wait for the next time, or maybe this is not for you. So I would recommend that you go with her, maybe for 2 or 3 sessions, to allow her to not feel that really insecure vulnerability of walking into a big room of people all by herself. So that will give her the confidence to do it. And then in 2 or 3 sessions, hopefully she's made some connections, because if you're not familiar with Grieve Share, you kind of start out in a large group and watch the video, and then you have breakout sessions based, a lot of times different places do it different ways, but we broke out depending on our type of loss. And so that would give her then an opportunity to be able to connect with people and develop relationships. So the next time that she comes, maybe that 4th time she comes, she can zero in on a face and say, you know what, I think I want to sit down next to her because we had this conversation last time and it really resonated with me, and I feel comfortable and safe with her. Because that's a big deal too. At 80 years old, you don't want to walk into situations where you don't feel comfortable and safe. So it's really kind of intimidating. So if someone in the family, and it doesn't have to be the same person every time, right? Take turns, say, split it up and say this person, 3 different people can go. It really doesn't matter who is going. It just matters that somebody's going. So allowing her to develop that community in a group of widows is really big. And that is something that I have seen be more beneficial than anything, especially for an elderly widow, to be able to connect in that way. And then the last point that I want to make is learn to be a really good listener, because you can't fix it, right? Especially, I think, with an elderly person who often in our societies doesn't always really hold a tremendous amount of worth. And I'm sad to even say that as that's coming out of my mouth, but our society generally values youth, and we don't always look upon our elderly as the treasures that they are. So learn to be a good listener. Learn to say things as they're communicating with you, like, I know that must have been very difficult for you. Or say something like, how did that make you feel? Because I learned that from something someone sent to me. A very wise person said, these are 2 things that you can say to somebody that can really make them feel heard. And at 80, she needs to feel heard. So listen, encourage her to be able to voice what's on her heart. And that is a huge gift in allowing her to mourn and move through the grieving process. So if you are walking alongside someone who is in this stage of life, I hope something that you heard today will give you tools for your journey. But if you know someone who needs to hear this episode, would you share it with them and let them hear the content so that they would be more equipped to be able to help? Because what I have found is that so many want to help, they just don't know how. So send them this episode, Tools for Helping Those That Grieve. And that's all I have for you today, guys. So until next time, take care. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I wanted to read a review that was left on my podcast by TJ Ferguson 82. It says, it's been 6 years, 6 long years since I lost my husband so unexpectedly to a heart attack. I thought once we got to the hospital and the EMTs gave me a thumbs up, he would make it. He did not. There was no goodbye. He was just gone. This podcast has helped me so much, as I too have questioned why God didn't allow him to live. I have shed a lot of tears tonight just listening to you, Teresa, but they are tears of joy knowing my husband didn't die alone. Thank you so very much. Excellent. May God continue to bless you and your family as you do His work through your ministry. I will be listening to all of your messages. Would you take a few minutes and leave a review on whatever platform that you listen to? This helps me get the message out, and I read every single review. Did you enjoy today's episode? If so, would you share it with someone who needs to hear it today? And I look forward to our time together next time.